Okay, so here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
9, 7, 1, 5. 3, 9, 7, 1, 5. 3, 9, 7, 1.
Welcome to Radioflash, Armada's military electromagnetic spectrum podcast with your host, Tom Withington, at the controls. Now, keen-eyed members of our audience may remember an article we published in late November entitled Fast Forward the Future. This looked at the emerging field of fictional intelligence, or FICINT as it's known. And in 2021, the Royal Air Force had commissioned a 3-volume series of books to imagine the RAF in 2040 and the challenges it and the wider world may face. FICINT is a very useful tool to help us imagine how the future may unfold. It is particularly apt for those working in the electromagnetic spectrum, where technology can move at breakneck speed. Peter W. Singer is an expert on fictional intelligence, founder and managing partner at Useful Fiction. He is also a New York Times bestselling author on technology and warfare, and he joins us today from Washington, D.C. Peter, a very warm welcome to Radio Flash.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, as I've just mentioned, FICINT seems to be growing at quite a pace, and I was wondering, how do you define fictional intelligence?
So FICINT is also sometimes known as useful fiction, and the idea is that it is the deliberate blend of nonfiction research and analysis, but sharing it through a narrative rather than a conventional white paper, memo, or PowerPoint. So to clarify not just what it is, but what it is not, it's not science fiction. You start with that nonfiction. You start with that key idea that you want to share from the real world, whether it's new research to explain how a certain technology works, whether to advocate for a certain new policy or warn about a threat. And so you start with that. But you wrap it within a scenario, you wrap it within a story with characters and the like. Another way of thinking about FICINT is it's what I do to my kids in the morning, except for policymakers. So I sneak fruit and veggies into their smoothies. So, at one end of the spectrum, you've got science fiction, techno thrillers. They're awesome. I love them. They're like a milkshake. They're sweet. There may be some good stuff in there, but you're tricking yourself, right? Strawberry milkshakes are really just for entertainment purposes. Same thing for sci-fi. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got your vitamins, you've got your kale. That's your white paper. That's your strategy report. Whether it's senior policymakers to young lieutenants, they will resist it. And so what we're doing is we start with that nonfiction goodness, wrap it in a story, and the target audience is not only more likely to consume it, but also a lot like a smoothie. The research shows that the ideas, just like the vitamins in a smoothie, are more likely to stick. They're more likely to strike with effect. And so that's the concept behind useful fiction. It comes in a lot of different forms. We've done it as a book, Ghost Fleet, that turned out to be, I've written a number of books, turned out to have the most influential work of my career, to in our useful fiction project, we've done short stories and narratives for everything from NATO, Allied Command Transformation, U.S. Special Operations, Canadian Forces, Australian Forces, you name it. And on topics that range from new technologies like quantum and AI to things that, might be kind of bluntly boring, but are really important, like defense education reform. Anything you can turn into a story, make it more compelling, reach greater audiences.
Of course, any listeners anxious for more information on Peter's smoothie or milkshake recipes are more than welcome to contact him directly. I'd read in a biography that you are the official mad scientist for the US Army's Training and Doctrine Command. Now, apart from that having a very cool job title, what does it actually entail?
So I'm one of many mad scientists. The Army has a program where they pull in civilian experts from other fields to help them understand new technology, envision potential futures, whether it's on the technology side or the strategic side. And it's called the Mad Scientist Initiative. And one of the ways that they pay you back is give you one of the coolest job titles that's out there. So that's what that initiative is. I think it points to besides having a cool name, I think it points to a larger challenge that a lot of organizations face, which is how do we wrestle with the future? And importantly, how do we break out of the conventional, boxes that we tend to, understand the world that often are what create strategic surprises for whether it's a military, same thing for a business. And so this is one of those initiatives that tries to draw folks in. It actually aligns really well with the other work on FICINT or useful fiction, in that in addition to conventional speeches and briefings and meetings, they also draw upon the group for helping to build useful fiction scenarios. And they've even run them as writing contests where they're pulling in anyone from around the world can help them wrestle with futures by building out scenarios.
Us analysts are often in the business of forecasting and trying to sort of look into a metaphorical crystal ball and make sense of what we may see in security and military environments, these kind of places. I want to talk to you a little bit about how FICINT and normal forecasting differ, and what's the strength of FICINT in that area, do you feel?
To be very clear, FICINT or useful fiction is one, it's just one tool of many. It is 100% not a replacement for the conventional white paper, trend report, threat briefing, whatever it is. In fact, it depends on that. It's to give greater effect from it. So it's nothing that's competitive. Secondly, it's in many ways you can think of it as the parallel in the traditional intel field. It's a bit of a play on words, but if you think about the other ints, human intelligence, SIGINT, signals intelligence, no one other than the most biased fan of one type would say, oh, if I've got human, I don't need SIGINT, right? Or if I've got SIGINT, I don't need human. Or, no, there's no value to OSINT because I've got human. No, you want them all working for you. So that's a second aspect to think about. But what the value of it is really turns back to when we think about the value of narrative. First, the science shows that literally because the way our brains work, our brains are more likely to take in and understand new or complex information more effectively when it's wrapped within a narrative. Couple of reasons for this. One, it's just evolution. Narrative story is the oldest communication technology of all. We were using it to share ideas when we were in caves gathered around a fire. PowerPoint, it was created in 1987. Which do you think your brain is tuned towards? In fact, we can see that in research. If you read a white paper about, say, new electronic warfare methodology, one part of your brain lights up. If you read the same content but shared through a narrative, 4 parts of your brain are engaging with it. A second value to it is it brings in emotion. And as everyone from politicians to used car salesmen know, we don't make decisions, even the most important policy decisions, solely on the bullet points. Emotion comes in. And so narrative can bring that in. It might be you paint a scenario of a future that you want to avoid. And you say, if we don't act, this bad thing could happen. Or it might be an alternative. Here's what this technology or this tactic would look like in execution. Ooh, I like that. I want that. How do we make that happen? Another value to it is its uptake is higher because the ask is easier and you can reach audiences in different locations and times. Bluntly, I'll give an example from a project we did for the Australian military. They had a 21-page report on the future of defense education. They'd spent 6 months working on it, obviously very crucial to the future of the force. Not everyone's excited to read 21 pages report. And so what we did is we turned that we identified their report's 3 key themes. It's 37 nonfiction facts that they wanted to share. And then we recast it into a story. The story follows officers. They go from war college to embassy evacuation in the wake of a tsunami. And so you read the story, but you get the good stuff, going back to that notion of a smoothie. Our story, over 15,000 people have read it. It was republished in Task and Purpose, one of the more popular online defense journals among younger officers. But most important, among that target set, it included the chief of defense of all of Australia and at least 7 U.S. 4-star admirals or generals. So you're getting a greater number, you're getting a higher level by wrapping it within story. And I think, for the topics that your audience is wrestling with, that's particularly important when you think about, complex technologies. It's hard sometimes to get uptake, but story, we can, they're more likely to engage. They might read it on a weekend in a way they would not read a briefing. They can read it on a plane, and they're strangely thankful for you briefing them that way. But it also, and I think this is very important, sometimes you need a story, a scenario, which may be fiction, to make something seem real, right? So if you think about like all the cutting edge of technology, it's sometimes hard for people to understand how does it work or what are its applications. And so by putting it in this is what it would look like in this situation, say from the perspective of an officer, a pilot, or even from the enemy, that makes it real to them. So those are some of the values of it. Again, it's not that it's going to predict for you a singular future. That's not the goal. It's more about the explanatory value, the impact value of it.
That segues us very nicely into our last question, which is probably quite inevitable, really, that I'm going to ask you this. But what do you see as the vexing technological challenges that the armed forces and policymakers really around the world may have to contend with in the future?
I mean, there's so many of them. I think we obviously have the geopolitical challenge of competition with China that's very different than the Cold War parallels because of China's able to access the global market in a way the Soviet Union never could. So is able to pull in high technology. Due to cyber threats, it's able to steal intellectual property and recreate systems on scale rapidly in a way the Soviets couldn't. But also China's doing some very cutting edge work in areas that range from hypersonics to quantum, AI, you name it. Different from the Soviet Union that really was only a technology peer in the early part of the missile race and atomics. I mean, the Soviets, they put up a satellite, but they didn't not only never get stealth, they never even built a decent car or personal computer. That's not the case with China. So you have that geopolitical competition. You have it taking place simultaneous to an array of truly game-changing, historic level technology shifts. In the software side, you've got obviously AI. You have things going on in quantum that are rewriting the rules of how we think about computing and what is possible there. You've got on the hardware side increasingly autonomous robotics and all that means. You've got shifts in the network that binds everything together between the Internet of Things and social media weaponization. All of those, as your listeners are probably more familiar than I am, they open up incredible new possibilities, but also the attack surface for threats to go after, whether it's through cyber or electronic warfare means. And of course, that's also melding together in ways that are we'll just leave it at the adjective is fascinating. So you've got all that going on. I think what is interesting to me, I'll end on this. I was recently doing a project looking at what are some of the lessons from the Ukraine war 1 year in for the broader future of war. And in history, wars are always they're battles of weapons and will, but they're also laboratories of a sort where, the other nations are watching what's happening there to learn from and applying their own conflicts. And there's two types of inflection points with technology and war that tend to happen in history. One is when a new technology is introduced into the conflict. It may not be all that powerful in that particular conflict, but it points the way towards the future. So the classic example of that would be the first use of the airplane in 1911 and the war between the Kingdom of Italy and the Ottoman Empire. A pilot literally takes 4 hand grenades up with him in a canvas wing monoplane and drops him out of the side of the plane. Doesn't, change that war, but it points to much, much more to come. In the Ukraine conflict, I think we can identify a couple examples of things like that. The application of AI in a major conventional conflict. We've seen a lot of that. Hasn't changed the war overall, but obviously more to come. Another would be we've seen the first Internet of Things attacks in a major conventional conflict. Again, didn't affect the overall sway of the fighting, but much, much more to come of that. The second type of historic shift is when there's a technology that's already been used in war, but it's brought together in a manner that's fundamentally new and game-changing. So the classic story there would be, the tank is introduced in World War I, but it's the Blitzkrieg in World War II that, really changes things. And I think coming out of Ukraine, the two examples there would be unmanned systems, robotics, obviously used in war for the last generation, but Ukraine is ended the debate that they don't have a major role in conventional conflict. They obviously do and have been very significant. And again, that's only going to grow. That has some major electronic warfare ramifications for obvious reasons, particularly as we see more and more small swarming systems. And then the second is the major role that social media weaponization has played. Again, we saw it in terrorism with ISIS, et cetera, but it's been a powerful strategic force in the war in Ukraine, and everything from open source intelligence to how it's affected Western politics, being willing to provide historic levels of aid to Ukraine that, in many ways, the politicians are reacting to what the public wants, driven by the popularity of Ukraine. Ukraine literally became the most popular cause in the world. And so you've seen huge changes from that. So to me, those are, okay, what does that mean? I'll just end on, both of those raise questions of everything from new possibilities in warfare to new questions of doctrine to then, your counters to all of that.
Peter, I feel we've only really scratched the surface of some extremely fascinating subjects that I'm sure we're going to be revisiting. I'd just like to thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Peter and I will in fact be on the same panel sponsored by AeroVironment on the 15th of February discussing artificial intelligence and autonomy. You can access this online and details can be found on AeroVironment's website at avinc.com. More details on the work of Peter and his colleagues can be found at useful-fiction.com. You can also find his books for purchase online and in all good bookshops. Don't forget, there's more military electromagnetic news and analysis at armadainternational.com. That's all we've got time for. Thanks for listening.